to vaccinate their children as medical experts advise, they expressed their noncompliance by submitting a form known as a personal belief exemption, a PBE, instead of paperwork that documented that they've completed all of their shots. There you go. That's the way you get out. You file your personal belief exemption. And as Alex has pointed out many times in his show, every state has that. We haven't reached the point yet where we have mandatory vaccines. They will bluff and bully you into vaccinating your kids with way more vaccines than were ever part of the schedule at a much, much earlier age. But you can get out if you educate yourself about this. What they're concerned about, as they point out, is they're losing the herd immunity. Well, no, what they're losing is the herd mentality to say that we all have to do this and we can't be honestly informed of the risks. Now, in other news, a victory is coming out in GMO corn, hopefully. An article from INFOWARS.com today, Christina Sarich writes, here's some of the best news of all this year for non-GMO supporters. Frank Kutka is working to save our heirloom corn from cross-breeding with genetically modified corn. He's diligently been working for 15 years now, developing what he calls organic-ready corn varieties that have the ability to block cross-pollination, thus eliminating Monsanto's prevalently grown GMO corn from infesting organic farmers' crops. This is a huge problem for organic farmers. As they point out in the article, millions of acres have been planted in corn, and 93% of it is GMO corn. And of course, Monsanto is not required by law to do anything to keep from contaminating non-GMO heirloom corn. As a matter of fact, if it gets contaminated, GMO can sue them for royalties. Now, what he's doing is essentially fighting genetic modification with genetic modification, isn't he? But it's a different kind of genetic modification. When you breed different strains of corn together, you are not doing the same thing as we're talking about with GMO. GMO, when we talk about that in general, is really transgenic genetic modification. In other words, you are splicing genes in from completely different species into this species. You're not creating varieties of a species by selective breeding, which has been done for thousands and thousands of years. In this particular case, what they're doing is putting glyphosate into the corn systemically so that you can't even wash it off when you buy it. That is what is so dangerous about genetic modification. And that's important to understand that distinction between transgenic genetic modification and just selective breeding. Now, in another victory, we have a whistleblower being awarded $447,000 by a Caddo District Attorney's Office. This is in Shreveport, Louisiana. This is a former Caddo District Attorney Chief Investigator who said he was fired in retaliation for an investigation that he was conducting into the District Attorney's Office's purchase of 8 M16 fully automatic weapons in February of 2012. The guy said he was doing his job as an investigator, and listen to what he found from 2009 to 2011. He found assistant district attorneys with lights and sirens making traffic stops, wearing SWAT-type clothing during work hours. He said they were motivated by, quote, a desire to be policemen rather than assistant DAs. You know, these guys are essentially power tripping, dressing up like cops, acting like cops, and doing crazy stuff. If only we could get the cops to stop doing that kind of stuff as well. But at least he's getting rewarded for the unlawful firing as a whistleblower. That was not in their job description. And many of the things that SWAT teams are doing should not be in the job description of the regular police either. Well, now we're seeing something from the banks that looks like essentially a replay of the subprime banking fiasco. The only difference is that this is about cars. And as of yet, they haven't packaged a bunch of bad loans together and defrauded investors. But look at what they're doing to car owners. The New York Times reported today, miss a payment? Well, good luck moving that car. And they're pointing out that auto loans to borrowers that are considered to be subprime, in other words, people who have low credit ratings, as they define, below 640, have really spiked in the last 5 years. Now it's about 25% of all of the car loans, and in just the first 3 months of this year, it was $145 billion in just the first 3 months of this year. Now, what are they doing? They're charging people 29% interest in many cases. They're uploading, in many cases, a $700 loan origination fee, as you can see on this website. These are one of the lenders that is engaged in this subprime lending. Now, as the New York Times points out, all of this credit that is given to people to buy these cars that they can't afford comes at a steep price to their privacy and at times their dignity, and they also point out to their safety. And it doesn't just threaten their safety, it threatens everyone on the road's safety. They say people have been stranded in neighborhoods when they had their cars shut down. Many times the cars were shut down as they were idling at a stoplight, sometimes in the middle of an intersection, as well as people who were going down the highway had their cars turned off. And it gets even more bizarre. Look at this instance in Austin, Texas, where we had a subprime lender tracked down the car of a lady who was fleeing her abusive husband. She went to a shelter to escape him, and because that was out of a 4-county area that they told her she could drive in, they shut down and repossessed her car. Do you understand what they're doing? They're setting up with these trackers what they call geo-fences. In other words, they're not only taking advantage of these people with enormous fees, enormous interest rates, but they're also proscribing where they can drive their car. And if they get out of a certain area, they seize their car. Or they might look to see during the day if they're at work. If they're not at work, they might start monitoring them more closely, they said, because that person may have lost their job, or maybe they're skipping work, and maybe that's going to get them fired in the future. A very, very dangerous, very predatory practice. And in another article from the New York Times that's related to this subprime bubble, they say the subprime bubble for used cars, borrowers are paying sky-high interest rates. And again, as I pointed out, in many cases, up to 29% interest. Consider the fact that today, banks are essentially getting their money at 0% from the Fed, yet loaning it out to people on credit cards and with these subprime auto loans at 20%, 30%, even higher in many cases. That is loan sharking. There is no other word for it. It is organized crime. That was something that the mafia did for years. There were usury laws against it. Of course, those were lifted under the Carter administration when we had runaway inflation and we had interest rates. People were paying 13% for fixed rate home loans. They did away with the usury rates. They need to be brought back. It's obscene that they should be able to charge this kind of money to people. And of course, the only thing missing from this scheme, we've seen it all before. The only thing missing from this that was in the subprime mortgage defrauding was to bundle this together. If they take all these auto loans and bundle them together and defraud some investors, then it'll look exactly like the mortgage loans. Now, just so that you understand that the government thinks that you're their slave with absolutely no rights, look at what the Forestry Service is proposing right now. According to the Daily Callers, they say feds could fine you $1,000 for taking an unauthorized photo on wildlands. Photos taken on federal wildland must now be approved by the U.S. Forest Service, and anyone who wishes to take photos or film commercially must be granted a $1,500 permit by the service or face a fine of up to $1,000. Now, supposedly, this is to protect the wilderness from exploitation of commercial gain, according to the U.S. Forestry Service. That's a bunch of nonsense. And it just goes to show how we have a situation where there is regulation without any representation. As a matter of fact, one of the senators, Senator Wyden, said that this was troubling and an unnecessary burden. He says, especially where reporters and bloggers are concerned, this policy raises troubling questions about inappropriate government limits on activity that is clearly protected by the First Amendment. Exactly. Why is it a problem for you to take a photograph of the government's forest or their wildlife? Why would that concern them? How is that impacting anything? What makes this even more strange is that unlike the national parks, the Forestry Service actually does give companies commercial access to things like logging and mining within their area. And they have a huge amount of area that they cover. For example, they have 190 million acres in the United States. 8.5% of the land in the United States is U.S. forestry land, about the size of the state of Texas. And they want to lock that all off and say that you need to have their permission to take a picture of any of that. What are they afraid of? Wouldn't it be a good thing for people to take a picture of wildlife, of the forests? Wouldn't it maybe make the public value that more? Maybe what they're concerned about is what we might see that they're doing with their crony capitalist partners. Just as we saw Harry Reid in Nevada setting up solar farms and other schemes for his campaign donors. Maybe they don't want you to see what they're really doing to the forestry land. There's absolutely no reason for this. This is worse than what King John did to Robin Hood and his men, saying that they would essentially not be allowed to kill any deer. This is something that doesn't impact those areas at all. Photographing forests is not a crime. They say they want a public comment period. Send them your comments. That's my comment on that. Well, that's it for this segment, but stay with us right after the break. Leanne McAdoo is going to have a retrospect on the career of Obama's attorney criminal, Eric Holder.
Hi, I'm Dr. Group. Today, I'm proud and excited to announce a new product to the INFOWARS Life product line. Introducing the first proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder. Backed by real FDA-approved phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. People are suffering from all kinds of digestive issues these days. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water, everything that you're exposed to on a daily basis ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. My main focus was to come up with a remedy for this, something that's safe and effective that anyone can take on a regular basis to keep their intestinal lining clean. You have over 30 feet of intestinal lining that can be compacted, that can be toxic, that can be full of parasites, fungus, bacteria. What are you doing to keep that clean and flushed out? My recommendation is to clean your intestines at least 2 to 3 times a week to prevent the toxic buildup from going into your bloodstream. You owe it to yourself to take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox Special at InfoWarsLife.com.
Eric Holder has announced his resignation as the U.S. Attorney General today. It's a position that he's held for the last 6 years. So in honor of this big announcement, we bring you the accomplishments of the Holder DOJ. Now, a lot of people have accused Holder of being the most highly politicized Attorney General. He came into the game with an agenda.
Every day, some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
So, of course, it's no surprise that Holder was later tied to the Oklahoma City bombings, an event that prompted several federal legislative gun control provisions, even though there was never a single gun involved. A similar allegation stands out in the Fast and Furious scandal, which was a covert DOJ mission labeled a criminal false flag by Ron Paul. With the full knowledge of the Department of Justice, ATF agents facilitated the sale of thousands of illegal guns to Mexican drug cartels and then dropped all surveillance of those weapons once they crossed the border. Those weapons showed up at multiple crime scenes in Mexico and at the murder scene of U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry.
When were you first told or became knowledgeable about U.S. officials allowing firearms to be sold to the drug cartels in Mexico?
I don't know.
When was anyone in the White House first informed about the tactics that were used?